Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk HR. Today, we're going to talk about probably one of the hardest things that HR get involved in, which is making people redundant. Making people redundant normally falls squarely on HR's shoulders because it's a people practice, and normally happens in a situation where an organization's got to make some changes, and it's not always someone's fault. It's not always a case that someone's made a mistake or anything like that. These things can happen. We live in markets that are ever changing and always changing. And the example I would give, I've worked in education 15 years, and we had a new organization come in that were heavily backed by investment capitalists. I had to sit in front of everyone, before redundancies happened and said, look, this company have come in. They've come in with a lot of money. They're making a lot of very big moves. And, I can tell you now that this is going to have a negative impact on our organization. And I'm going to tell you straight from the bat. One person raised their hands and said, does that mean that there's going to be redundancies? And my honest answer is I will do everything I possibly can to ensure that doesn't happen. But with the money that they're putting in, it's probably going to change the shape of how our organization has to work and how competitive we can be in our success rate within the marketplace. So there is the potential. And that level of honesty is something me and Anne-Marie talked about yesterday, which is being honest with everyone and not sort of dressing things up is really important. But the first point, Anne-Marie, is, redundancy doesn't mean failure. It doesn't mean staff have failed. It doesn't mean management have failed. It doesn't mean everything's gone wrong. Yes, something and someone could have made a mistake, but it doesn't mean people are bad at their jobs if redundancies come knocking, does it?
No, absolutely not. It's one of those things that unfortunately it happens, and largely when it does, it is through circumstances that are out of an individual's control. You can be the worst person at your job, you could be the best person at your job, but in the business environment that you're in, something can change, whether it's, as you were saying, the position of the business, the industry that you're in, investment capital coming into the company. Something will change that just means that the direction that you're heading isn't the direction that's needed in the future. And it's not in any way an individual fault or a team's fault. It's just one of the things that unfortunately happens, really.
Yeah, and Umar, I'm trying to think about situations, where redundancies could occur. Yes, you've got new competitors. Your organization might get merged. Your organization might shut down a division because it's trying to put resources into another area. I mean, there are a whole host of reasons why redundancies happen. Failure is not, failure is one, but it doesn't necessarily tend to be the main driver, does it?
No, it's basically we first have to look at why redundancies really happen. I mean, there are external factors and there are somehow some of the internal factors also. First, looking at the external factors, which definitely no one has much control over. It's the economic recession that's coming up into the market. That's basically is one very such a reason which, of course, the organizations themselves do not control. That's the bigger government side thing, or basically a global phenomenon also sometimes falls into it. Then somehow the businesses shift. In fact, the priorities of the business that also shifts, and that is somehow is an internal thing which an organization has to take care of within itself through its own vision or mission or whatever the organization has an objective for the longer run. If that changes, that brings in redundancies. Another very important aspect of, that I consider is a positive aspect of when the redundancies happens is because of the technological shift, especially in terms of manufacturing businesses or businesses which are ideally classified as labor-intensive businesses. And when a new machinery comes in or new process of the same business comes in, the workers get perhaps we should call them redundant, in fact, and they're laid off also. But that is a positive side of a redundancy, I think. That once the technology comes in and the earlier work that that people were doing in about, let's say, in a month. The machines are now doing it quicker. And that is one aspect which we have seen a lot in, especially in the case of our industries in Pakistan, when the manufacturing has shifted towards a lot of technology sides, and that brought in a lot of redundancies. And as we go along in this discussion, I will share some examples also from Pakistan that helped a lot in terms of the businesses and overall economy, not suffered, but that was a growth trajectory that we have seen over the past few decades in terms of these kind of redundancies where the technology has came in.
I'm going to stick with you on this, Emo, because I think it's a really interesting point, and a positive element of redundancy seems like, well, we've got technology and we lay off staff, and that's positive. It doesn't. Your initial thing, it doesn't compute, it doesn't make sense. But actually, one of the things we need to remember in redundancies is when you lay off people, when you bring in technology, you're protecting other people's jobs. There's a whole host of people that, if you didn't do this, if you didn't integrate this technology, if you didn't implement these cost-saving measures, more people would be at risk the longer you don't do it. So it's a really interesting thought to that, to go, well, actually, we're going to make this computerized, we're going to lay off staff, and this is going to benefit the people that remain in the organization. We're going to protect more people. It's almost counterintuitive, but I kind of get what you mean. Is that where you were going?
Yeah, you see, in over the last couple of decades, if you see in Pakistan, there is lots of. This is one part where through redundancies, through technology, redundancies has come in, but at the same time, there is a lot of entrepreneurial setups that have come up. Those who gone redundant, the organizations have started helping those people who got redundant to start their own entrepreneurial setups. There is a bunch of startups in Pakistan over the last 5 or 6 years, and those startups are mostly technology startups, and they are using less of people, the more of technology. I'll just give you a quick example of a large telecom company in Pakistan. That's the state-owned telecom company that started integrating into lots of technology over the last 2 decades. I think in earlier 2000s they started lots of technology upgradations, and because of that, in 2008 they started a huge network of huge exercise, in fact, of laying off people. All people were going redundant, but they were giving golden handshakes. And the golden handshakes, and it's a voluntary retirement scheme started for lots of people. Because of that, lots of people got paid for a year's salary, bonuses, and a lot of stuff. And then they merged into the system, and they merged into the economy, and they've started their own businesses. Someone started his own shop, or someone started his own smaller businesses. And this redundancy that happened because of technology, I'm only referring only because of technology, that has brought up a lot of self-employed people into the system, and that helped, in fact, the whole of economy coming up into a good stream of new businesses, and that they created new employment, in fact, for lots of other people.
It's really, you see, this is a really interesting point for me, Anne-Marie, because if you think about it, a lot of people get into a habit, they're getting into an employment habit. Like, this is my job, this is what I do, and stuff like that. Whereas actually, redundancy comes, and as Umar said, we've obviously got payment rules and regs here in Pakistan, golden handshakes and stuff like that, where suddenly you've got this money, you don't have a job, and you go, do you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm gonna try and be my own boss. There's a big surge at the moment of people, setting up their own businesses, and it kind of makes you take that jump almost, doesn't it? It's interesting when you think about it, Anne-Marie.
I think there's also it is really interesting because it's almost it's a process that presents itself as being initially a negative process, or a process that individuals may feel like they've failed throughout, but actually in some ways it gives them the confidence to consider doing things that they never would have done had they continued in that role and continued in that job and stayed where they are. And I think if you're in a position where you're made redundant and then you kind of come out of it, you've got settlement money, whatever it is, and you think, oh, I'm going to now try and do this, become an entrepreneur, set up my own business, be my own boss. I do sometimes wonder if there's an element of, well, if I'm my own boss, I'll never be made redundant again, in a way. So it's sort of a strange process in that sense. Maybe a strange way of looking at it, but I do wonder if that's perhaps something that's also a consideration. If you're your own boss, you're not going to have somebody make you redundant, therefore you're,
Well, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, just to add one more thing. I mean, there is. I can understand there are lots of differences globally in terms of how the local HR is behaving in this way. Of course, the HR's role comes into play into the whole system that once the redundancies are on the card. But at the same time, what we have seen over the years, and of course, in Pakistan, there is lots of unemployment also, people who don't have any jobs, but they still try to start something, some very little business. They try to get some skills, and in that case, in Pakistan especially, lots of vocational training institutes have come up, and those vocational training institutes supported by somehow international donor agencies, somehow the government also putting into effort into that, and lots of people are getting the skills of perhaps AC electrician, the telecommunication experts, or phone or mobile phone operators, or all these things, and these people are starting up smaller businesses in Pakistan. Although, I mean, yes, we would be in the later part of the program, we will definitely talk about how the HR plays a very, very significant role once this comes to light that there are going to be redundancies, or somehow the technology is coming in and we are going to make redundancies. And I would love to listen from you also as to how you see it.
Process. But I mean, the training contract is a thing. We'll probably come on to that a little bit later. So many people do get, we'll give you X amount of money to invest in training, in your own development. We'll pay for courses. I've had it, I've worked in training for the last 15 years, and people do get that. I'm going to study HR because then I can't be made redundant. Which, if you've worked in HR, you very much can be. But normally that's kept quite in-house and away from things. But there is training contracts and training that comes with it. But I think, let's start to talk a bit about the process. Now, the process when I've done it in the past is normally we put together a slide deck. Everything starts with a slide deck sort of showing the shape of the organization, how it currently is, and how that it's going to change shape moving forward. We talk about the number of roles that are there, the number of roles that are there, certain things that assimilate over, and we do that in a presentation deck to start with, and we present that to everybody. So we might do road shows 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We might do online, face-to-face, a whole range of things. This is what the organization was. This is how the organization is going to be. We then give everyone the ability to book in a one-to-one consultation with us to sort of talk about what it means for them, what their options are, and vent. A lot of the times it's vent, angry. They want to quiz. They want to blame the organization for the situation. And sometimes they're the legitimate complaints, and sometimes it's just situational complaints that really not in anyone's control. Then you go through the potential reapplication or automatic assimilation, depending if there's roles that people automatically assimilate into. The rule here, I'm going to say this, I can't say this wrong. I think it's over 50% of a role you can assimilate into a role if your job description matches it over 50%. And then we go through that interview process. People are then successful in the interview process and unsuccessful. And if they're unsuccessful, they get issued with a redundancy letter, which they take to a solicitor, get it signed. And then there's redundancy pay, if appropriate, that they get for that role. So that's kind of our process. Now, in America recently, we've seen that you can just be sent an email with a meme on it in the redundancies that we've seen in Twitter. So I'm going to assume, Uma, the process in Pakistan is not quite, let's send you a meme and an email and say you're gone. Is it as rigorous as the UK process, or is it somewhere in between?
It somehow it depends on the kind of industry or the HR that is operating. I mean, there is very little follow through onto the rules in different industries in Pakistan. Those who come into the limelight, they definitely have to follow the rules. But HR has to play a very important role into that. But the process depends lots of in terms of what kind of industry is that, and especially the manufacturing industry. I mean, they are, and then of course the education that people have or the training that people have, or perhaps the opportunities they have. So it is quite loose. There are lots of loose ends in terms of the process that is played out in Pakistan. Especially when it comes to the telecom, I witnessed two large redundancies in Pakistan, and one was, of course, I earlier referred is a national telecom company, which went through a very process-oriented thing because it was owned by the government, and then it was reducing the staff because it was selling off certain of these things also. But then there was another very important company that was British American Tobacco that has a licensed company in Pakistan, that was Pakistan Tobacco Company, and they did this whole process. And I again refer to the, since there was a lot of technology coming in, and they reduced their staff from about 5,000 to just 1,500. But they took a huge process of about 5, 6, 7 years into that. There were union issues into that. They planned into the whole process. They brought in external consultants into that. They started doing lots of training programs throughout this process. They started to selling all these concepts to those people as to how we are going to improve the whole setup when we will be reduced. They had lots of problems also into their factories, but yes, they had planned it very well. But on the other hand, coming back to your original question, in Pakistan, yes, the process is it has loose ends. It's not always followed into letter and spirit. If one day there are family-owned businesses, and if they want to reduce the staff, they want to do redundancies, they would do, and nobody will question them. There would be some cases onto them, and the people will go to the court, and the court will run the cases for years in and out, and nobody will question them into that. But yes, the basic process is that when HR gets involved, if HR gets trained, and if they are CIPD trained HR people, or if there are SHRM trained HR people, they follow the process, and they like their owners, the CEOs of the companies, to follow the process, which is, of course, lots of preparation goes into that. And I always advocate the fact that the whole thing revolves around communication. There has to be communication and communication with the people, because once someone is losing its job, it's really hard, regardless of which kind of economy one is living in. But it is really hard to cope with the whole setup. I mean, one takes about 5, 6 months at least to come back to the normal self if one loses a job. So that's kind of a thing which HR has to do. HR has to be very sympathetic. HR has to bring in lots of communication into that. And as we go along, I will share another very good example that happened in Pakistan. But I would like her to say something into this, if there is.
You make, yeah, you raise really good points, and I think one of the things you mentioned, and I know Anne-Marie, you'll have had experience of this, is you mentioned in British American Tobacco, and it's communication with unions in these types of situations.
Yeah.
So I say that knowing Anne-Marie's probably had multiple conversations with unions and things like that. And unions in the UK, they're there to protect workers' rights and to ensure that people are treated with dignity and respect. And the process, they challenge and unions here, they challenge the process, not just on the process of redundancies, but also the business decisions behind it. And they challenge you on all elements of that and try to come up with various different solutions. And you've got to work in consultation with them. Anne-Marie, what's your experience of working with a workers' union in terms of this type of process?
Generally, going into it with a collaborative and human mindset, being very, in the same way that we've talked about being open and transparent in the process with individuals affected by redundancy, doing the same with trade unions. It can be more uncomfortable in some ways because of the probing questions that will come back to you. The questions around, okay, why is the organizational change happening? What's the rationale? Where has this come from? Will it really make things progressive and better, or actually could you do it in a different way? Is redundancy something you have to do? I think it's having that, you've got to have that openness, transparency, and be prepared for those questions and have genuine answers to those questions, because obviously if you don't, that can make a change a lot more complicated, and it can make it a lot more combative, I think, rather than having your trade unions on board with you. If you can have your trade unions on board with you, there is an element of, it makes it a little bit easier then to explain things to employees, to explain to individuals the change, why it's happening, redundancy, what it means, what are the options for them. If your trade union is in the room and they are combative, they are against the change, that has a knock-on impact on the people involved. They then are less likely to engage in the process, more likely to see the process as being done to them in a very negative context, and it can get quite tricky and heated to then navigate, I think. Certainly from some of the experiences I've had, definitely.
And just sticking with you, Anne-Marie, how, like, in this situation, emotions are high. People have got bills. They're worried about bills. They're worried about what their money's going to be. They've got a union member who can join them in every meeting, because that's the rules that we've got here, and can sort of help them from a, taking emotion out of it almost, because obviously you're worried about all these things. How important is it, treating people with dignity, treating people with respect, making things not personal. If they're personal towards you, well, you're safe, it's fine, it doesn't bother you, you're just getting rid of me. All these things for a HR professional, they're not easy. Like I said it at the start, I think it's one of the hardest things you can do as a HR professional, sometimes going through this. And the first time I've always found is absolutely the worst, because you start to understand it a lot more. How do you ensure that you're treating people with dignity, you're not taking things personally when things explode to you? How do you approach that type of thing? So I think yesterday you talked about being a critical friend, and that's kind of what a union is. They're being a critical friend, but you've got to get them critical at the right moments, and a friend at the right moments, and dignity at the right moments. How do you approach it? I don't know how you approach that, but how do you approach it?
I think ultimately you have to go into it with the acknowledgement that yes, you are the employer, yes, you are business, yes, you are HR. But ultimately you're talking to a human, you're talking to an individual, you're talking to somebody who is going to see a situation like redundancy initially very much as something that is personal, because of the impact that it has on their personal lives outside of work, their income, their finances, their family life, how they're going to be able to sustain themselves, all those kinds of things. I think you've got to acknowledge that when individuals hear about redundancy or any kind of organizational change, the immediate reaction is very sort of, you've got denial, you've got anger, you've got bargaining that kind of goes through a person's mind, thinking, no, this can't be happening, this won't be happening to me. Oh, actually, it is happening to me, and I'm really angry about it. How dare they make me redundant? And then the kind of, oh, well, rather than lose my job, could I do this? Could we do this? Are there any alternatives? And it's going with somebody through that process and respecting the fact that at the end of the day, you're talking to an individual, you're talking to a person, and they deserve you to sit and listen to their concerns. They deserve you to sit and kind of hear what they're saying. And, they will come out and they will say some horrible things, potentially. They'll say some angry things, some things in the heat of the moment. But in the same way that you're acknowledging that for them, you've kind of got to acknowledge it in yourself as well, and just think it's not about me, it's about them. It's about how they're reacting, not me. I've got to do this process. It's really horrible, but ultimately I do still have a job in some instances. I am, I'm not where they are. So I've got to appreciate what it feels like for them to be there, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And what can be really difficult sometimes with this, Uma, is, if you're a good HR business partner, you're getting people engaged in the organization, wanting to be part of the organization, enjoying, not disengaged, they're proud to work for this organization. And then you're taking away something that, they're proud of and a sense of accomplishment because of what they're doing in the organization, especially telecoms, manufacturing, that type of thing. It's like, I'm proud of this product we're producing, but this product doesn't want me anymore. So people can lose themselves sometimes in a situation of redundancy, can't they, Uma?
Yeah, sure. This is basically this is a bombshell somehow on people. In fact, if HR itself is laid out or being redundant, I mean, we also feel the same way. But there is a very interesting thing happened about, and this is another incident that happened about 15 years ago in Pakistan. There, if you could remember, since I'm not sure if you could remember, because I do remember, because there was a huge earthquake in Pakistan in 2005, and as a result of that earthquake, I mean, lots of our northern areas was completely wiped off, and there was lots of United Nations agencies that came up, and they started building they started rehabilitation of that area. And in about 2010, once the rehabilitation was completed, there's some of the United Nations agencies were closing down their work. And what they did was, interestingly, I mean, they included me into that also. That's why I remember that, because I wrote a book at that time about the job search process and interviews and resume writing and all the stuff. And they called me in for a small lecture also to their staff, who they were now being redundant because the project finished. So they were training them for having a new job. So HR, on the one hand, is asking them to leave, but on the other hand, the HR is also preserving their dignity, perhaps, or helping them out into a new job. Is to train them to get a new job, and by writing new resumes, by writing how to appear into interviews or how they can apply for new jobs. I mean, this is one of the service which basically in current HR, in CAPD also, in SHRM also, it is called another very good service that HR has, which is called outplacement services. So the outplacement service is basically, once you are done with them, you can outplace them in some other place. So that's basically, for that, the HR has a very, very significant role in terms of preparing those people whom they have worked with so long. And as you were saying, that someone who has put his or her heart into making that product, but now that product is not just shutting them off, they are helping them to get a new job, perhaps in somewhere, some other organization. So in a sense, that can be a source of enhancing their self-confidence or self-esteem, as to they are not being they are done with their work here, but look, this company, as an HR, we are helping you to get a job somewhere else also. And somehow the HR community as a whole can work a lot into this by developing forums where the people can learn about how to get new jobs. So that's one thing came to my mind, that how HR can preserve that dignity.
You make a really, really good point, because I don't think, I mean, from my experience, I've never been asked to do this, but everything you've said is normally something that we get involved in, because management will say, right, we need to remove numbers here, and we need to get to here, and we need you to run the process here. But they will never say, can you set up a load of CV writing clinics? Can you check people's CVs? Can you give them a hand with this? But people will ask it along the way when you start to engage with them, whether they decide to apply for a job or not apply for a job, or take redundancy or not take redundancy. They will ask you all these questions. And it kind of moves on to, Anne-Marie, you can't make everyone happy, because redundancies can't make everyone happy. There are people that are going to be unhappy in this process and unhappy with an outcome when they apply for 3 or 4 jobs and don't get any of them. But you can still try and give them the best chance of success, because that's what your organization was trying to do whilst they were employed, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially for myself, obviously in the NHS, we know more often than not, well, all the time, when you're in a redundancy process, you cannot make everyone happy. There's always going to be someone who comes away at the end of the process and feels like it's been done to them, they've lost out, they've not had opportunity, whatever it is. But I think you've still got to try. You've still got to try and give everyone any opportunity, because I don't think really you could honestly say you were good HR if you didn't, would be my view.
Yeah, it's people practice, isn't it? You know, he's trying to help people be the best version of themselves within the best role that they can be. And if it can't be in your organization, at least trying to send them off with the best skills that you could possibly be. But
yeah, kind of, we did our best. We tried. It's not personal. It's not you or me. It's just the way that the situation has kind of ended up. Because I think the alternative would be, oh, well, nothing we do will make you happy, so why should we bother? And that doesn't seem to sit right. That just seems, not good.
Now, one of the hard bits of this humor is redundancies are really hard on people. You know, and there's a lot of stress that comes out. There's a lot of anger. There's, you know, all the processes Anne-Marie mentioned. And there's all the emotions under the sun. I mean, all gets directed at you in the HR, especially if you're doing the one-to-one interviews with everyone where, you know, and you've got a combative sort of people sat with them, whether it's a union, whether it's a critical friend, whether it's someone from an external organization coming in to help them that's been approved to join. It can be really hard on the HR person, and you can't give it back to them because it's their opportunity, you're safe and stuff like that. How do you, in that situation, Emma, how do you deal with all the stress and pressure that's directed at you in this instance? You know, where do you vent? What do you do to make yourself feel better? Because that's going to be something where when people go through this for the first time, they're going to go, well, where the hell do I turn? Because everyone's stressed out.
Yeah, I left the job, in fact. So the issue is that, of course, the HR. I mean, we call ourselves HR in Pakistan. I mean, there is a new trend coming up. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it is there in your part of the world also, but we call ourselves the change agents. So the change agents are the people who take lots of. I mean, on the one hand, we call ourselves change agent, and at the same time, we also are shock absorbers. So we are the kind of people who absorb a lot, because the owner of the company is directly working with us, or the CEO is directly working with the head of HR, and anything bad that happens the first time, the first person to know should be knowing is basically HR, and the first person who is going to tell the other people is HR. So we should be trained in a way. I mean, that's somehow it's good also that we should be trained in a way that we should be shock absorbers, and we should be helping ourselves first. In fact, it's kind of a thing which we should be able to communicate, and that's why lots of psychologists, psychology studies, and lots of human behavior studies are coming into HR. Besides the technical side of HR, this is something which is very important for HR to understand the emotions, the emotional intelligence studies that they should be doing, the human behavior studies that they should be doing. They should be understanding how the people will be behaving, how they themselves will be behaving. It will be hard because, you earlier said that we are, of course, none of those who are being laid off are robots. Similarly, we are also not robots. So, but at the same time, if we are not robots, we need to understand that we have to communicate this to all of other people who basically are not trained to understand all these things. They are not trained. They are trained for their own technical stuff. They are trained for their supply chain, for their manufacturing, for their accountancy, or whatever they are doing. But HR is trained to convey such news. HR is a communicator. HR is a shock absorber. HR is a human behavior experts also. So they should be. They should be studying all those stuff, and then if they could study, there isn't anyone to turn to. I'm very safe to say this because everyone is in the same boat. So there would be no one who will be consoling HR. In fact, so HR has to take care of itself.
Yeah, one of the things I do, and one of my tricks when I go through this type of thing is I work out when it's all finished, when it's all ended, all the paperwork should be done and stuff like that, and I book a week's holiday.
No.
I'll take a week, reset.
Yeah.
Not a week with the wife, just a week by myself. I'll reset, and then I'm good to go again. Once I know it's all been done, that's one of my ways of sort of dealing with this. Because as you say, with a lot of the time, yes, you can turn to each other in HR and the other people involved in the process, but nobody's really, if everyone's dealing with the same thing, no one wants to take on more stress, more baggage, more issues. What about you, Anne-Marie? What's your sort of cope? Is it wine? Is it that's one of the favorites, isn't it?
No, it's not wine, it's whiskey. And just plenty of downtime. So going off and doing things that I like to do, where it's just kind of me, whether it's listening to music, going to a concert, just doing something that gives you some headspace to think and process what you've been through. I like what Uma was saying about we are shock absorbers. I quite like that, actually. HR, the shock absorber. That's quite catchy. But I think there's only so many shocks that you can take as a professional, and you've got to have that mechanism there to look after yourself and to recognize that, yeah, you'll take the shocks, but you've got to put something back in order to be able to continue doing that.
Is it a smoked whiskey like a Lagavulin, or is it?
That's all anyone wants to know now, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm in.
Just one more thing, James. Someone in one of the training programs I was a participant of, and the speaker said that HR is like a queen of the chessboard, and HR and the queen of the chessboard moves everywhere. So they go this way, wherever they want to go. So they are kind of a queen of the whole system, and they understand that what is happening, and they should be like that. I mean, lots of companies, lots of HR, in fact, do not put themselves into that pinnacle of being a queen, but they should understand. They should have their self-worth at that level, that they could help everyone into that whenever such eventuality happens of redundancies. I
think there's a lot of elements within HR where we talk about well-being and getting people sort of emotional development, psychological development, and if we're going to preach these types of things, we do have to live them ourselves. But in a situation like this is where they're challenged. In a situation like redundancies, it's where it can be hard on everyone, and nobody sort of necessarily sleeps very well unless they drink a lot of whiskey. Peaty whiskey, normal whiskey, dark whiskey. Whereabouts in Scotland? Or just any?
Bourbons. I like my bourbons. And I do like it with a twist. So with ice and with a twist.
So almost like an old-fashioned.
Yeah.
All right, I'm with you. I hate whiskey. The wife loves it. Done so many whiskey tastes, and I'm like, no. She's like, oh, I like this. Anyway. So in terms of summarizing, redundancies are a necessary evil for HR, and they can be a really difficult process. But as long as you're honest and you're open and you treat people with dignity, you treat people with respect, you communicate openly and explain why, help people see the opportunity for themselves, whether it's setting up a business that they've always dreamt about, whether it's finding another job, whether it's helping them with CV. Redundancy isn't just about breaking the bad news. It's helping people go through that almost, it's that lost change curve, isn't it? Denial, and then bargaining, and then coming to it. Helping people get through that as quickly as possible so that they can be as employable or as progressive within their career as they can be. Yes, sometimes we've got to break bad news. Yes, sometimes very big change happens to us. Yes, sometimes we're not at fault for any of it at all, but it happens because of market conditions or anything like that. Or sometimes a business can just make a wrong decision. Businesses are always ever changing, and we have to understand that. And our job is to help protect as many people within the organization as we possibly can. And sometimes that does mean redundancies. This has been Let's Talk HR. This has been making people redundant. Thank you very much to Uma and Anne-Marie for the conversation on this one, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care.